Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. Today, 30th of October 2023, and we've seen the first article in the Old World Almanac series. The first look at the rules of the game we're expecting in early 2024, probably in February. And without further ado, let's have a look at the information that's been revealed. So today we are looking at the turn sequence for the game, and at first glance this does look very familiar with a movement, shooting and combat phase. The turn sequence does confirm something really we already knew from past articles, in that the magic phase was going to be disappearing, but we do have a new phase in its place. We also learn as part of the article that each phase is going to be split up into 4 sub-phases, so giving each part of the game a real structure. This is something that will again be quite familiar, I think, to veterans of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and is something actually I quite like. If you take by comparison 10th edition of Warhammer 40,000 at the start of your command phase, which looks like it's probably the equivalent of the strategy phase, more on that later. At the start of the command phase, 3, 4, 5 things all happen simultaneously, leaving it for the active player to decide what order they need to do things in to give them the biggest advantage around getting the intelligence they need to make decisions. I think having a clear structure really helps here, because it means everyone knows what order everything has to be done and you don't have that much of a clash. So as I said, we've got a new phase, the strategy phase. That is the phase that this article's really about. We can see at a quick glance through what the information we've got about the various phases, that magic will be cast in every single phase depending on the type of spell. So magic missiles, for example, will be in the shooting phase. Hexes and enchantments, so buffs and debuffs, coming in the strategy phase. Something called assailment spells in the combat phase. Who knows what they'll look like. But yeah, so definitely a different take on magic. But what is the strategy phase? Well, the first part of this phase, which makes up the start of the turn, is to take special actions or take tests. So stupidity, presumably frenzy, things like that, will all be wrapped up here. It's noted as well that a particular scenario may require you to check whether a victory condition has been met at this point. This says to me actually that scenarios are going to be a lot more important than they have been in previous editions. Again, something that's probably familiar from more recent editions of Warhammer 40,000 and Age of Sigmar. So rather than victory being determined by how many banners you take, how many enemy units you break, stuff like that, there's going to be an element of maneuver, taking objectives, things like that. That's what I'm reading from this, but of course could be completely and wildly wrong. Then we have a second sub-phase, which is a command, which is using character special rules. So magic items, things like that. And there's an example given of the Falcon Horn of Freedmund, which is a Bretonnian magic item, which negates the use of the fly special rule. Now, obviously, we don't know what armies will look like in Warhammer Old World. We don't know how common flying creatures will be in the various metas. It does remind me a little bit of the Storm Banner, which was a staple in 8th edition for the Skaven, but feels like this one could be a little bit more situational unless everyone's rocking dragons, wyverns and the like. The third sub-phase in the strategy phase is Conjuration, and it's using spells to apply buffs and debuffs to units on the table. Now again, we see an example for a Tomb King spell that's used to re-roll any natural rolls of 1. It's got a casting phase of 7+, which is interesting, I think. So this doesn't, to me, give an awful lot away around how magic's going to be used. And it does, again, comment in the article that we'll hear more about this in future articles. But I wonder whether we're going to see the demise of power levels in the way that we're familiar with. So instead of having a level 1, level 2, 3, 4 wizard, and the higher level your wizard is, the more likely you are to cast spells, whether that's going to be tweaked somewhat. Presumably we're looking at a spell cast on 2d6, 7 plus is more likely than not to go off, with a 7 being the most frequently rolled option. But if we were to have power levels where you add that into your dice roll, magic levels, this would be on a 3 up on 2d6. So yeah, I'm getting a suspicion from this we might see something different, particularly as with spells scattered now throughout the entirety of the turn, we're not going to see those pools of magic dice and dispel dice being battered against each other. So we'll see what happens there. Final step is rally fleeing troops. Now I think it's quite interesting that this is the last thing you do in the strategy phase, because it means if you've got a character that's fleeing at the start of your turn, they're not going to be able to cast spells, use magic items and the like, because they won't be able to rally until the end of the strategy phase. So any which precedes the sub-phase for rallying isn't going to be an option that's available to that particular character. There's a little note here actually which is quite interesting about morale. When a unit falls under half strength, it gets a -1 modifier to its leadership when rallying, and a unit under 25% can only rally on a double 1, meaning as you take casualties, units are much less likely to be returning to the fray. The article finishes on a note that there will be more of these articles coming up, looking at the rest of the phases in more detail, magic, morale, psychology, and other stuff. Also, a bit more information about the various factions, setting, models, basically what's coming up with the game when it's released. The final thing I think to note is that the turn sequence talks an awful lot around the active player. So it does seem that the game is going to follow the traditional route of you go, I go. Now, I don't think this was particularly unexpected. Games Workshop have said that the game is going to be heavily rooted in past editions of the game, and Warhammer has always really been, certainly for all the years I've played it, a you go, I go type of game. Now, this may be a little bit of a missed opportunity to make the game a little bit more interactive, with units being able to act on initiative, or models from both armies moving in the same phase, stuff like that. Or perhaps even the introduction of orders and borrowing from successful games and well-liked games such as War Master. Now, these are things that do appear in other gaming systems, so there's stuff out there that they could have drawn inspiration from. But instead, we're very much going for the classic look. Whether that is a missed opportunity, I think, remains to be seen, but we've got very little information at the moment, so it's going to be difficult to form a firm judgment. Overall, I don't think there's tons and tons to get excited about here. We kind of know a little bit now the game's going to be structured. There are some positives. I quite like the sub-phases. I do think they're important to give clarity over what happens when, rather than the free-for-all of everything happening at once in Warhammer 40,000. But I think the biggest benefit is this really does show now that we're getting a ramping up of information, and we can start to really bite down on the hype train and start to get excited about what's coming, as each article promises to reveal more and more useful information about how the game is going to be played. So there we are with my initial thoughts on the Almanac. Some positive, some perhaps missed opportunities, but overall I'm just happy to be getting more information as we now close in to the expected release date. If you have enjoyed this video, do consider dropping a subscribe. Before you do so, you might want to check out some of the back catalogue, see if this channel is for you. I do try and keep as up to date as I can with the information being released by Games Workshop to provide my thoughts and takes on what's being revealed. All that remains for me to say is thank you once again for listening. I am returned to the old world. Have a great day.